Hey, IOStax here. Today's lesson is on consistency. Class is in session. Now, consistency is hard to measure. However, a lot of people tend to rank pro players based on their consistency in tournaments. Basically, consistency means how close you are to your mean performance in your games. Being very consistent means that you always play the same. Being very inconsistent means that you can carry games at one day and completely fail on others. Now, in order to measure this, I use another Google Docs. Basically, each row represents a rating from 0 to 100, and after every game, you rate yourself and add a 1 to the correct row. Now, over time, your graph may look something like this. Now, this is a very inconsistent player, because in this case we can see that some of his games he would rate himself as a Grandmaster player, some games as a Diamond player, and actually quite a few games in the high silver to low gold range. Now, this is an extreme player, and the little arrow at the bottom of the graph is what we would call consistency. The longer the arrow, the more inconsistent the player. Now, this may look kind of unrealistic, but for instance, if he has internet connection issues, maybe he deals with lag or high input lag or other social obligations that keep him from completely focusing on the game, this can actually happen. Now imagine if the player, in this case, could always play at the level in the blue circle, and the blue square. Now obviously he has proven he can do that, right? Like, he has quite a few games in that section. However, he also has a lot of games outside of that section. So the goal of playing more consistent, which only comes with time, is to get more games into that blue area and less into the other area. Now let's look at another example. This player is a bit more consistent. We can see that the arrow is a lot smaller. Most of his games are in the diamond range. However, he has quite a few where he would rate himself as low as high gold maybe. Now just imagine him playing like the blue section in every single game. Then he could actually manage to probably reach master if his self-assertion is correct, or the assertion of someone else. Last example, this is a player between Platinum and Diamond, and again, he is very consistent, right? Like, he doesn't have games where he's an absolute beast. However, he doesn't perform badly in every game. In this case, we can see if, again, he would always play in the blue range, he could actually be a Diamond player. Now, this is heavily reliant on self-assertion, and having someone else assert your games is really, really helpful. If you aren't honest with yourself, then these statistics mean nothing to you. Now, this is what I call ideal consistency. So each pair of graphs represents the optimal consistency for a certain tier. Now, obviously, we can see that, for instance, the two graphs in the master tier, if someone had a consistency like that, he would always play like a bang on the middle average master player. Same for the other tiers. Now, if you want to be a master player, for instance, and you are currently diamond, then obviously this is what you should aim for. However, this isn't always realistic. Now, consistency can lead to frustration. You will feel like a god in some games, however you will feel like trash in others. Sometimes you'll ask yourself, am I even progressing? And the answer to that is yes, you still progress, but it takes a lot of data to see that. Maybe you'll ask yourself, am I getting worse? No, you're not, you're actually getting better, you may just have a bad week. Let's have a look at an example. Now, in this case, the player tracked 200 games. Now, obviously, these statistics aren't very realistic. They are kind of well organized and structured, but for this example they will do. So in the games, in his first 100 games, his lowest game was in High Plat and his best game in almost Grandmaster and High Master. Now in his second 100 games, his consistency turned out to be on Low Master to High Grandmaster. Now obviously this is a really extreme example. This is not what a real chart would look like, and this is really just to show my point. Now, in his first 100 games, let's say his last few games were in the blue range. So his last 20 games of the first 100 were mid-master level. Now, his next 100 games, the first games there, maybe they were also in that master level, right? So he didn't actually play any better. Quite the opposite. His standards increased, however, he performs at a lower level compared to these standards. Now, obviously, nobody would say that the top graph is worse than the bottom graph. Quite the opposite, actually. However, from his perception, if he only takes 40 games out of those 200, he can think that he isn't progressing at all. Even though if he only plays a couple more games to get a full set of data, he will actually realize how much he has improved. So how do you maximize consistency? First of all, you need to ensure a consistent physical state. Make sure that you always eat or drink something before playing, ideally the same thing. For instance, I like to drink a tea before playing just so that I can get into the mood. Also make sure that you don't play at different states of wakefulness. So playing after waking up in the morning is completely different than playing after a long day at work, and you need to keep that in mind. Also, you need to make sure that your sensitivity is consistent, so no things like mouse acceleration are turned on, even though I don't actually think you can do that in Overwatch. And if your mouse has a DPI switch, make sure that you don't accidentally press it so that your DPI settings are always the same. Same thing with your frames per second, make sure that they are consistent, because consistent FPS lead to consistent input lag, and consistent input lag leads to consistent aim. Also, your ping should be consistent, so make sure that you aren't downloading or uploading anything in the background. The more consistent your ping is, the more used you become to the gameplay scenario. Also, a lot of people like to play with music. Now, I really don't have anything against people playing with music or anything, but music can be distracting, especially when listening for footsteps. So when you are tryharding, when you really want to focus on your gameplay, make sure that the only thing you're listening to is game sound only. Now, obviously, this includes voice comms. I'm not saying that you shouldn't join voice comms because they may over loud the footsteps, but no music in the background is ideal. Also, when you like to play in groups, you should stick with the same people. You shouldn't hop around different groups because you start to build synergy with your stack. And if you play with the same people over and over again, you will start to develop callouts, develop strats, develop synergy, and that really, really helps with your group performance. Now, consistency only comes with time, so obviously there's no magic rule to be more consistent. If you want to know whether you get more consistent or not, the best way is to just start a chart and track your games. You can probably add this to the match tracker that I shared in the last video. Alright, that does it for this video. I would like to thank you all for watching, and class is dismissed.